This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have with me Timothy Renner. Hello, Tim.
Hello. Good to be back.
And instead of participating in a roundtable or anything of the sorts, we're talking about your excellent new book, Don't Look Behind You.
Yes, my second of 2018.
That's true, isn't it?
I'm trying to catch Nick Redfern.
But this is the follow-up to the first book you sent me, your first book, right?
Yeah, my first book, Beyond the Seventh Gate, and this is the follow-up, which I like to point out, they go together, they complement each other, but you don't have to read one to read the other, so you can get the new book without reading the first book.
Yeah, it's just there's a few things in here where you say, that's covered in the other book, because you're not wasting the time to recover the same info in both books.
Right, yeah.
Which I appreciate.
Well, it's a separate volume. Like I don't think I'll get another volume out of Toad Road, but I didn't think I'd get a second volume out, to be honest.
And it's a quick read. It's a good read. I kind of flew through it, and I got to a point, and I stopped for a minute, and I went back to it, and I only had 2 pages left, and I was like, "Aw!" Like that was it. Whereas normally I'm going, how many pages do I have left? All right, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
Especially when I have like a 400-page book, even if it's really interesting, there's a point where reading fatigue sets in.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, doing Strange Familiars, sometimes you just have to read books, and you have to, and it's not that they're uninteresting, it just may not be what you had chosen to read at that moment,
right.
Given the choice. But you have to read it because the guest is coming on, and you got to do it.
Or you're getting tired, and your brain stops processing the information.
Right. And you read the same page 3 times.
Yeah. And you're like, all right, I need to stop and do something else for a bit.
Yep.
But yours is it's a very fun read, honestly. There's some really neat stuff in here. And, of course, it's mixed in with your excellent artwork as well.
Well, I knew it was going to be a little shorter than the first book, and I think it's only by like 7 or 8 pages or something, maybe 10 pages shorter than the first book. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to really kind of kick up the art end of it. And I'm really happy with the design of this book. I think I did like masthead illustrations which change with every chapter, and spot illustrations to kind of mark the end of every chapter, and then of course the full page illustrations as well. So design wise, I'm very, very happy with this volume. I kind of kicked it up a notch, I think.
Yeah, and it has a great intro from Josh.
Very pleasant, very kind intro from Josh.
And we were talking before, I think both of us had the same reaction to you before we really delved into your stuff, where we figured you were just going to be another guy with a bunch of stories. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's good, but like you had submitted the first book to me, and I was going, I don't know, this is going to be cheesy, isn't it? This is just going to be, ridiculous urban legends. And then I'm reading your book and, oh, this is really good.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm these are local stories, but I think I'm talking about the wider kind of paranormal issues, which we talk about on Where Did the Road Go a lot. The idea is that this stuff is connected to something bigger, or perhaps just all connected to make something bigger. This kind of web of the paranormal that all seems connected somehow.
Well, that and all stories are local to somebody.
That's absolutely true.
So, I mean, I don't really care if they're a collection of local encounters and stuff. I appreciate the fact that you have debunked some of the urban legends. Especially like you did in the first book. That was the first thing I noticed. I'm like, oh, this guy's actually doing the research. Okay, this is interesting. And as you put it in the book, in the process of debunking this stuff, you found other more interesting things behind it.
Yeah, much more interesting. Yeah, the truly kind of weird stuff starts coming out, and when you get things like, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead, but that story of the Toad Man, which seems so bizarre. It seems like such a bizarre thing. But then you can find these other sort of things to back it up. You know, these other sort of data points where I found an old newspaper article that talks about something that kind of sounds like the same thing. And then, you know, these other instances of frog and toad men in folklore and so forth. And it becomes like, all right, well, maybe there's something that's really strange going on here.
The how have your views changed from the first book to now? Because it's been what, 2 years?
Yeah, incredibly. I mean, like massively. I think. I mean, I think I hinted at some of the ideas. I was getting there as I dug into this stuff, with the idea that I thought maybe it was all connected, but I really, I wasn't going to say that. I think I specifically avoided ghost stories because I felt like they were covered too much in other people's kind of local books, but B, because I didn't necessarily think they were related to the cryptid stuff, which was kind of more where I was looking at that time. And then since that time, I've really kind of started looking at the paranormal in a more holistic sense, I think, and I just really kind of feel like it's all connected in ways that we probably don't understand, but that seem to, kind of tap us on the shoulder and say, hey, pay attention.
And I think we helped push you that way a little bit too.
I would say absolutely, absolutely.
And I think a lot more people are going in that direction, which I think is great. Where they're looking at this stuff not in their little niches.
Yeah, and I mean, another big difference is I think at that time I was almost wholly in the idea of I'm not sure if all cryptids, but especially Bigfoot, being a flesh and blood thing, or at least I didn't want to step on any toes of anybody who felt it was a flesh and blood creature or solely a flesh and blood creature. And I think that's been probably the number one major change for me, where and I have to be careful about the way I talk about it, because I have to say that I completely believe that when people are seeing it, it's completely physical and real, and you could reach out and touch it, and it could reach out and touch you, and it leaves footprints and hair and everything else. But I just don't think it's a natural animal in any way, sense, shape, or form. Rather, it's just too weird. There's too much weird stuff with it, which I think Josh and I will prove with a very, very large book we are working on currently.
Oh, it's gonna be long.
Oh, it's gonna be a mass. It will break your foot if you drop it on your
foot. well, Josh doesn't write short books, so
no. There is a lot of meat to this book that we're working on. We've just begun. I mean,
I thought you were somewhat into it.
No, I think Josh is a little more into it than I am, because he got a jump on. I was finishing up this book, before we started the one that we're writing together, and he got a good jump on me, and so he's more into it than I am. But we have a long ways to go.
Okay, all right. How speaking of changes, how has your view of Toad Road changed?
I think before I kind of thought of it as a place where Bigfoot kind of hung out. And I think that's kind of the main thing I was looking at. And occasionally people saw weird lights and so forth. And I kind of hinted at it being maybe as one of these like nexus points, like Skinwalker Ranch or whatever in the first book. But I genuinely feel like there's something about that area. I don't know if it's the creek. I think it more likely be the creek, or possibly the connection with the iron furnace there than this closed road. I think this closed road just happens to be there. But I really do feel like it's absolutely some kind of nexus point for the weird. There's just too many odd things going on there.
And the fact that the creek runs along it is not lost on me.
Yeah, I mean, it completely parallels it. And that was one of the sort of new bits of historical information I found, that it was literally the towpath so the Cadorus Creek comes out of York City, and they would have used it to take supplies to Cadorus Furnace and even out to the Susquehanna River. And it wasn't deep enough in places to, to float these barges. So they had to have a towpath to help pull these barges along. And this road would have been the towpath for a good portion of this road. So I think that's probably how the name Toad Road came about. I think it was the tow road, and just over time people started, calling it a toad road.
Yeah, that's that is interesting, actually. The fact that you have moving water right by it, and even going back to when I talked to Walter Bosley, and he was talking about how a lot of time telluric currents follow those moving paths of water.
Yeah. I mean, I've even played with the idea, and this is like goes back to that album I did called Wildernessgeist, which is kind of a ritual to summon cryptids. That was the intent of it. I don't know that it worked for anyone, but the idea of water passing over something, consistently, this sort of literal kind of current, and maybe it's the type of stone, or maybe it's just the action of the water. And I was even playing with the idea of maybe it's the constant sound, like maybe it has something to do with sound. That I whatever it is, I do think that that's a huge player in the game.
There was the name of the book, The Hide Behind. This is an interesting story where that comes from.
Yeah, so it's kind of a throwback to the first book. So I talk about The Hide Behind more in the first book, but it's to me it was such a landmark moment for me. So it was my wife Allison who first told me about Toad Road when I moved to the area, and at this point, this is pre-internet. And there were not stories of seven gates of hell there. Like that became the story later on, in an insane asylum that supposedly burnt down. That's all nonsense, which I debunk in the first book. But what she told me, she said, the only thing I know, because as soon as I moved here, I said, well, where's the weird stuff? Where's the ghost stories? Where's the legend? And she said, well, there's Toad Road. And she said, the only thing I know about that is, I went to day camp out near there, across the creek from it, basically. And someone who was at the day camp pointed across there, and they said, that over there's Toad Road. Don't look behind you on Toad Road. And I was like, ooh, that's interesting. And I kind of filed that away for years. And I didn't know what to make of it. I was like, is there supposed to be some kind of, killer or stalker that's behind you? Or what's the case? And at the time, I'm debunking these crazy stories of burning insane asylums and seven gates of hell, which were never there, and so forth. But I am finding these cryptid reports popping up. And I'm like, wow, this sounds like cryptid stuff. And as I'm looking through this, I came across this bit of Pennsylvania folklore called The Hide Behind. And it sounds for all the world like a Bigfoot creature. It's something that hides behind trees and peeks out from behind trees. And they said, only the bravest should be the last in line, because they could be relied on to never look behind them. And then that's when it clicked with that thing, that first statement Allison told me. It's like, oh, don't look behind you. That fits in with the Bigfoot thing perfectly. And then it kind of made sense for me. It was just another one of those moments where it's like, oh, you're on the right track here.
And it also, you mentioned in the book too, Paulides has pointed out that a lot of times the people who disappear are the ones last in line.
Yep. Yeah, so that was the other thing with The Hide Behind. It was supposed to, I guess if you look behind you, you would be so frightened if you saw it or whatever that, I don't know, if you'd freeze in your tracks. They don't really explain the process in the folklore. They just say, but it would often snatch the last person in line, which completely clicks with the missing people stuff.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it makes sense. If you're going to grab someone, you're going to grab the person either lingering behind or way ahead.
Right, yeah.
And that seems to be the case. Those are the most likely to disappear. Someone runs far ahead, and then, when everyone else catches up, they're not there, or, that last person just lingers off.
Yeah, they're just gone.
Yeah, it's a weird sort of thing, and I love the name, The Hide Behind.
Yeah, I think there was a cartoon on. Somebody told me after that I published the first book. They're like, "Oh, there's a cartoon that has that in it." And I was like, "Oh, really?" I don't remember the cartoon. It's some kids cartoon or something. I was like, "Oh, wow!" But I don't think it was limited to Pennsylvania. But the references I found were specifically from Pennsylvania. I think they said it was a Nanticoke. Obviously, it's not a Native American word. It's been anglicized.
Right.
but it was I think it was a Nanticoke legend, I believe.
And you did find that there was an actual gate on Toad Road.
Yes, I mean there was always one, at least in the time that I've been going there. It was just a galvanized gate that's kind of closes it off so people don't go down there. But there was an actual gate, and several people. So I did a lot of gate debunking in the first book, where I was very dismissive of these gate legends because of this Seven Gates of Hell thing, which is, it's just borderline ridiculous, this idea.
Right. Yeah.
And I was contacted by people, and these are people like my age and older. So these are people who went there before the internet, and they kept telling me again and again, there was a gate there. There was a gate. And I was like, okay, a gate, but were there 7 gates? Like, no, this has nothing to do with 7 gates, but there was a gate. And they're describing this big iron gate. And through a weird series of just, research and coincidence, I put together that it was the gate to this poor maligned doctor's house that people were going to, like as early as I think the late 50s. They were going there, and things were supposed to be happening. Whatever spooky stuff would happen at this gate, but people would go there to hang out. And there's a legend of a guy who hanged himself on the gate, which I cannot confirm. It's kind of hard to, if you don't have a time period or a name, it's really hard to confirm, something like that.
Yeah.
I did my best to research it. I doubt it's true, but it's sort of this kind of hanging out there, like where several people have told me that, somebody had hanged himself on the Iron Gate out there. So there was a gate, and unfortunately for poor Dr. Belknap, it was outside of his house. So it's just another thing to sort of tie him to the legend, which he shouldn't be tied to. And he was the guy that's named in some of the books as the Mad Doctor, who was keeping insane asylum patients in his house or something, which is absolutely not true. He was a cardiologist. He didn't work with mental patients at all.
Why don't you, for anyone who doesn't know, explain the whole 7 Gates of Hell thing real quick?
Yeah, I should go over that again, because it's been a little while since we talked about that. So there's a legend of 7 Gates of Hell that pops up all around York County, Pennsylvania. It pops up other places in Pennsylvania and in other states. There are a lot of places have a 7 Gates of Hell legend. But in York County, the one I was writing about, I first heard about it, and it was tied to a place called Hex Hollow, which is in southern York County, and a graveyard in the city called Prospect Hill. I had heard it at either of those places. In York City, the graveyard is. And the way it worked was there's supposedly 7 gates. They weren't physical gates. They were more like symbolic gates. And as you would do this kind of circuitous loop around the graveyard or through Hex Hollow, and as you made a loop, you would go through one of these symbolic gates. And on the 7th loop, each loop would get progressively scarier and more horrible, and you'd see scarier things and so forth. And supposedly no one ever made it back from the 7th gate. Well, post-internet, and I specifically remember there was a Pennsylvania Legends group. I don't know if you remember back to Yahoo groups.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still on a few.
There was something else before it was Yahoo groups, and I forget what it was called, before Yahoo took it over.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, but it goes back like that far. There was this Pennsylvania Legends group, or I think it was Southern Pennsylvania Legends or something. And I remember specifically these people, they were well-meaning, but they cared not about the truth. They came up with the wackiest stuff, and they would, every weekend they would go on a new mission. Like these, I imagine they were kids, but and they would come back like, we found the true story of blank, whatever it was. And I remember one time they said, we found Nelson Raymeyer's house. Now that's the guy who was killed in Hex Hollow in the supposed Hex murder, and that happened in 1928. And they're showing pictures of a house from the 70s. I'm like, nope, that's not, can't be. Sorry, that is not his house. Now that his house is widely published in books. It's been in the Weird Pennsylvania book and it's all over the internet, so people know what it looks like. But at the time, no one knew what it looked like. People were just guessing, and I had to shoot them down on that. And they came out and said, so there's this. We found the 7 Gates of Hell. They're at Toad Road. And I was like, whoa, I've never heard that before. Like, that's not what I heard about. And then they came out with this crazy story about there was an insane asylum back there. that burnt down, and the patients that didn't die in the fire ran through the woods, and the local townspeople were so afraid that they killed them all in the woods. And it's the ghost of these insane asylums that are back there. And the the fathers of York City built these 7 gates to keep people out of these ruins. And the story from there was very similar. As you go through each gate, things get more horrible and so forth, and no one returns from the 7th. And I said, this sounds like hokum. This is bad B-movie stuff. And I went to my father-in-law, who is a genealogist, and he has all these old maps dating back to the late 1700s. Nowhere could I find a building along Toad Road bigger than a hunting cabin. And I just said, no, this didn't happen. Like, it did not happen. And then they immediately changed the story to it being a mad doctor who kept patients in his house, and his house burned down. The story there was the same. And, it took me a while to debunk that. I didn't get to that one until my first book. But I was like, I don't think so. And when the Weird USA books were coming out, they published my story on Hex Hollow, greatly edited from the original. And they asked me to take pictures for that and for the Toad Road story. And I said, I'll do that, but please let me see the story before you publish it, because there's this really goofy thing that's out on the internet that, is the story of the place. And it was to my great disappointment that they published my picture next to this crazy story of a burning insane asylum.
Right.
And that's when I made up my mind. I was like, someday I'm going to write an article to correct that. And then that article turned into now 2 books.
And, when I started reading your first book, that's exactly what I mean, where I was like, oh, don't tell me it's just these weird urban legends that are so like I said, they're campy. They're not,
Yeah, and I make the point of, like, the story of that guy being hanged on the gate. At least there's like symbolism there, and there's mystery, and it feels like something that could have happened. So while I don't think that happened, I do think like the symbolism is appropriate for the road, and it doesn't upset me as much as this goofy kind of bad B-movie thing with the burning insane asylum. And I proved not only was there never an insane asylum back there's never been a standalone insane asylum in York County. We've never had one. It's just we've not had one here ever. So, that goes out the window. There was another hospital nearby that burnt down. So there are things that happened that I think were close enough. Yeah, that made these kind of silly legends stick. So the fact that there was a gate there that people remembered going to for spooky stuff that was at this doctor's house, the fact that there was, probably 8 miles away as the crow flies, maybe 8-10 miles away, an actual, hospital type building. It was an old person's home. At the time it was called a sanatorium, but it had nothing to do with mental patients.
Right.
That did burn down. No one was hurt. No one died in it, but, it was kind of close. So there are these things that kind of happened nearby that were close enough that I think made that legend stick, but it simply didn't happen. And even to this day, people will claim, "Oh, I've been there. I've been through all 7 gates," and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure you have. Okay."
And yeah, that's one of those things. When someone says that and they clearly believe it, you got to wonder what they're remembering.
Yeah, and I mean, and people have come out and said, well, there are symbolic gates, or that you can't see the gates unless you're there at midnight, or at midnight on a full moon. And then I've even had it as specific as you have to be there on a full moon on Friday the 13th to actually see the gates. And it just gets crazier and crazier.
And that's one of those things where when stuff like that comes up, it's kind of like, why would Friday the 13th matter?
Right.
Does the universe have something about Friday the 13th? It's not just,
exactly.
A human invented thing. Oh, wait, it is.
Yeah. It's the other now follows the Gregorian calendar.
But you do find certain dates that show up, like John Keel showed that most UFO sightings will happen, like I think a Wednesday or a Thursday.
True.
In the middle of the month. And it's kind of like, why? Why would that even happen? Because what are aliens checking the calendar? Or whatever they are. My answer would be that it's somehow we are generating these. Right. But again, why would we even generate it then?
Because we've been told the UFOs appear on Wednesdays in the middle of the month.
Well, I don't know, because I think Keel came up with that by observing patterns.
That's true, yeah.
So, yeah, it's and it may not be a pattern anymore. Maybe if you look at a wide enough grouping of sightings, that won't be the case.
Right. But I mean, Keel is certainly one of the people who I absolutely respect, because he was getting out there. He wasn't just putting figures together. He was getting out there and getting in the thick of it.
Oh yeah.
And he came to a lot of the same conclusions long before I did that I'm coming around to the more I look into this stuff.
Yeah. And let one of the things you talk about on here that I found really interesting was the car bumping.
Yeah.
And I don't think you mentioned this in the previous book.
No, these are all stories that came to me afterward. And just there were two separate stories. People didn't know each other. The one came to me secondhand, but the person had been out there, and she had told me another story about the area. And then she said, well, my friends went out there one night and they had their car repeatedly pushed down. They said something was like pushing down. And this is in the 1970s, so these are heavy cars. And they said they kept looking out and they couldn't see anything. So whatever it was like really pushing down on the trunk, and they attributed it to a ghost at the time. And then I was at a paranormal convention. A guy came up and he told me a story. Saw the book. He said, I was out there and I was with my girlfriend, and we had the entire back end of the car lifted up off the ground and dropped. And he said, I forget what kind of car he said he had, but again, it's the 1970s big heavy car. And he said this happened a number of times before they got out of there, and they couldn't see whatever it was. And through much difficulty, there's a fellow in the first book who, it's a newspaper article, and it talks about him being attacked by a big hairy monster in the area. I was able to track him down with great difficulty after the first book. I had to write him a letter. He had no internet presence. I took a shot in the dark. I found an address in a phone book. I thought, well, maybe this is him. Maybe he still lives here. I sent him a letter and included my phone number and said, I'd really like to talk to you about this incident. And he actually called me back. It was the right guy. And over the course of 6 months or more, I kind of drew the story out of him little by little. He didn't like talking about it. In my layman's opinion, he had PTSD. He said every time after he talked to me, he'd wake up screaming from nightmares for about 2 weeks after he talked to me about it. He said his girlfriend hated when I called. She didn't like him talking to me because she'd have to put up with him having nightmares. But he told me, so his attack story happened when he parked his car out there. And it wouldn't start, which we find in various paranormal cases, including Bigfoot.
And UFOs, obviously.
Yep. And he sat there for hours. It wouldn't start. And then he said something kept coming up and brushing against the car. And he couldn't see it. Whatever it was, he'd look in his mirrors and he couldn't see it. Now, this is nighttime. This is, past midnight. He was there, like I said, for several hours. And at some point, I think between like 3 and 4 in the morning, he finally says, well, I can't stay here all night. Didn't have a cell phone, obviously. This is 1973. Gets out of the car, starts running. He said he was like terrified, so he's just running. He's going to go look for help. And runs square into something. And he described it as a monster. That's what he said. He said it was big and hairy, and it was on 2 legs. And this is the fellow I remember telling you this, and you chastised me about leading the witness. Because I said to him, do you think it could have been a Bigfoot? And he got very quiet, and he said, I never thought about that. Maybe that's what it was. And but he never confirmed. He just said it was big and hairy. It was on 2 legs. So that was the third sort of incident of something kind of messing with people's cars when they were out there.
And what strikes me about that is, you have cases of UFOs making cars move. Of course, in that case, you have lights involved, because someone will see a light come down, hit their car, and the car will start shaking or even lift off the ground. So there's a connection there. Mm-hmm. But there's also a connection to the thing I experienced with the tree moving, and there not being anything there, that there was nothing visible moving the tree, but there was something very large moving a tree. And you talk about this, too, in relation to, I think it was a Toad Road visit you made.
Yeah. And that was the first thing that, like, so I'd been out there a few times, researching it. I'd hiked the whole road. And other than that photograph, which shows a blurry maybe something, I don't even particularly like talking about it, but people do find it interesting. So, I put it in the book, in both books, so people can have a look at it. But other than that, which is, I didn't see it when I took the photograph. All I can tell you is I don't know what it was. I didn't see it when I took the photograph, and I've been back to the same spot. I can't repeat the photograph. So whatever's there is not there anymore. That's all I can say. But the first sort of like really genuine thing that was like, what is this? Like, I cannot explain this, was I met a guy out there who told me he was finding Bigfoot evidence. And he took me and showed me around and showed me these different breaks. Some of them were interesting, but completely inconclusive. One of them was very interesting because it was an X formation where the roots were completely like pointing up in the air. So that's pretty interesting because trees usually don't fall with the roots up.
Right.
But most of them, I'd have to put in the category of inconclusive or snow breaks. There's a lot of snow breaks and weather damage and so forth that people get very excited about when they see. So I'm very cautious. I've been fooled myself. I think I talk about that in the book where, I got very excited, found a bunch of tree breaks, and then it turned out to be nothing, completely natural. But anyway, there was some interesting stuff. And as he showed me this stuff, his girlfriend had gone, like 100 yards down the way and sat on a rock next to the creek. And she came back up and said, I heard a huffing sound, like a huffing sound across the creek. And she's pointing in the area where it was, and I'm looking, and there's these big white sycamore trees that really stand out against the other trees in the area. And so there's one of these that's just rocking back and forth. I mean, really, really rocking back and forth. And I said, look at that. And the guy's like, oh, it must be the wind. I was like, there's no other tree moving. It's the only tree moving. He goes, oh, yeah. Like no other tree around it was moving. It was just this, and it was really going back and forth. And so that was the first time anything, genuinely weird happened to me out there where I was like, I can't explain that one. I don't know what's going on there. We couldn't get any closer than the creek. You can't really, it's called Cador's Creek. It's basically a fast moving river at this point. I couldn't cross it, certainly not in February. It's polluted anyway. I wouldn't want to get in that water on the nicest day of the year. But I certainly wasn't going to cross it in February. And I couldn't see, it's just trees and brush across there. So I could not see anything at the base. I couldn't see the base of the tree. So there could have been something there moving it. There's not paths over there. There's no way it was a person. What it was that was moving it, I have no idea.
Yeah, as opposed to me where I could see around the tree and there was nothing moving it.
Yeah. And I mean, it would have to be, like I said in the book, it would have to be either like a team of humans with ropes or like a Clydesdale. So it would have to be something that big. That's how big these sycamores are to rock it.
And the one we saw, I mean, it was a decent-sized tree, but it was also thumping on the ground loud enough that I thought it was a buck just, running its horns against the tree. Mm-hmm.
So the tree itself was rocking that far?
Oh, yeah. The whole tree was moving, and, there was just ka-thunk, 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 ka-thunk on the ground, and it's like, okay, something really big is on the other side of this tree. And then there was just nothing there.
Yeah. See, I couldn't get to the base of the tree, but there was something over there rocking this tree. That's all I can say. Or, I cannot explain how. And there's, like I said, there's no pass on that side. There's no way to get down in there for people. So I just can't imagine what it could have been.
There was someone waiting weeks and weeks for you to show up just so they could shake a tree.
Yeah, exactly. They knew we were going to be there on that particular Sunday in February of 2016 or whatever it was.
Now, Michael is the guy you were talking about a minute ago with the PTSD about this, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Christine was the other one I put down here who had a bunch of interesting stories.
Yeah, she called me randomly. She just called me. I think she found me just online as someone local who's into paranormal stuff. So she called me and she just starts talking about all this stuff, like all these different experiences she's had. And it wasn't until like 3/4 away in the conversation where I was like, well, where is this happening? She's like, oh, Trout Run Road. Well, Trout Run Road is the modern road that kind of leads into where Toad Road is. And I just went, whoa, all right, now we need to like get into this a little bit more. And I mean, she saw orbs and UFOs and again, she wasn't a Bigfoot person. She heard screams. That's all she said. She said there were screams. She didn't know they were tied to Bigfoot. And I didn't say they were either. I'm just, to her, I didn't.
Right.
You know what I mean? She just heard screams from the woods. I'm trying to think of the other stuff. She just had multiple encounters, a lot of orb stuff and light stuff.
Yeah, which we find common in a lot of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and that was interesting because I'd gotten some orb reports out of the area, but nothing like this where she's just like, yes, there's an orange orb. She described it, bouncing across the field. And then this sort of UFO formation. I'm calling it a UFO. It was a formation of lights in a kind of chevron that she saw. I don't know. She herself said, I don't know if it was a craft or just lights in a formation, So, I'm calling that a UFO because it wasn't an orb.
Right. It was a bigger thing.
Yeah. And it sort of had a formation to it, but again, she wasn't sure if it was a craft or what.
And you saw stuff, and I don't think you ever talked about this with me, that you saw that looked like drones.
Yeah. Now this was relative to, so without giving too much away, Site 7 is this other area. It's very similar to Toad Road in that it's a closed road. It's now private, and it's in the same general area. Like it's it's along the river. It's not far from Toad Road. So I threw the Site 7 stories in the book because it's such a similar area and seemed like a good place to put them. And I saw. I mean, Allison pointed it out to me. We were driving. We were on the way to a wedding. Actually, we were driving. She said, "What is? You see that in the sky?" And I looked up, and I can only say they were drones. They looked to me about the size of an automobile. The weird thing is they weren't streamlined like military drones. They looked like, the only way I can describe them is like Star Wars ships and all the different like pipes and panels and stuff. That's the way they looked to me. And they didn't look particularly aerodynamic. They looked kind of blocky. And there were two of them. One followed after another. And they kind of followed the road to the river, and then they both did hard right turns, absolutely like on a dime, hard right turns, one after the other, and went south on the river, and then we lost sight of them. I don't know if that's UFO or what. It seemed drone-like to me. Now, whether that's military or something else, I have no idea, but I've never seen anything else.
I'm not sure why the military would make something that wasn't sleek and streamlined, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, every military drone I've ever seen, and they look plane-like. This didn't look particularly plane-like.
Yeah, because I don't think the Star Wars design is generally a effective one. It may look cool.
Yeah. Right. And that's what, and I looked at this, it just looked like there were like just parts and pipes and panels and stuff on it. That's the way I remember it. Allison remembers it a little sleeker than that, I believe. But they were dull gray, and there were no lights or anything. And there could have been. They seem like they moved too fast for a propeller type drone, but maybe there could have been some sort of propellers in them, but they seem to be. If they were hidden under hoods or something. I couldn't see them. It wasn't like the drones where you can see the propellers.
Yeah, that's definitely weird. But, weirdness is expected in these areas after a certain point.
Yeah, and I don't know what to mean. It flew down the river towards Site 7. That's all I can say. Like, I don't know where they were going, if they were going there, if they have anything to do with anything else. And people had seen, I think a few months before that, there was a big UFO sighting where people from both sides of the river, there's a town of Wrightsville on one side and Columbia on the other, and people, Wrightsville's on the York County side, Columbia's on the Lancaster County side of the Susquehanna River. And people from both sides had seen this. We got really good reports, like several reports of people seeing this big, thing just hovering over the river.
What was the other thing? Oh, when you had told me initially of the drone sighting in Site 7, when you ran into those kids, and they accused you of flying a drone over it. It had when I read it in the book, it came across very differently than when you described it on the show. And I'm trying to remember exactly what the difference was. Just read this yesterday. But there was something that I guess I didn't quite get when you described it, and then when you describe what they told you they saw.
So they came up. So we were there one night, and it was right about midnight, and it was a really weird night too because I was very paranoid for some reason. I was like very, very frightened, and I remember specifically I was there with James, who sometimes co-hosts Strange Familiars with me. I remember specifically saying to him, "Man, I'm getting a bad feeling tonight. I don't like it." And I said, and he's like, "Why?" I said, "Why?" I said, "It's not like." I don't think it's Bigfoot. I don't think it's like supernatural. So I think there's people around. I just get the feeling there's people around. And right about midnight, so this is, sometime later, at least a half an hour after I said this, we start seeing lights in the woods. And at first I'm like, whoa, what are those lights? They're really moving. And then we could very quickly tell they were flashlights. And at this point, I kind of freaked out because I'm thinking there's poachers back there. No one should be back there. I'm like, whoa. And I wanted to go. I was like, let's just go, and then we'll come back. And James was very insistent about staying. I did, like, I drove probably about 100 yards. And he's like, no, let's go back. And I was like, all right, because I didn't want to be the coward. So I turned around and drove back, and he jumps out. I think he jumped out of the car before he even stopped moving and runs over. And by the time I get out of the car and walk over, I hear him go, what are you guys doing? And it was these three teenagers. And they said, well, we thought you were cops. And they get up and we asked them, so, did you see anything weird back there? And the one kid's like, right away, I mean, like on a dime, it's like, you mean like Bigfoot? And we were like, well, anything weird like that. And the other kid like really shot him a look like, shut up. Like just shot him a look over like, do not say anything more. And then he's like, and that kid then said, no, we didn't see anything weird other than that drone you were flying over our heads. And I said, we don't have a drone. Like, we don't have a drone. He's like, no, you guys are flying a drone over our heads. He's very insistent. And this is a wooded area, and it's dark. And I cannot imagine, it was summer as well, so the trees are leafed out. I cannot imagine the drone pilot that could fly a drone over someone's head in the woods in the darkness. And I think, like, probably the place where we were would be, if you were able to do it, would be the only place you could do that. So I can see why they thought it was us, but I showed them, it's like, we don't have drone controls. It's not us, man. And then they were kind of like, whoa, that's weird. Somebody was flying a drone over our heads, and then they just kind of left.
And that again brings up, like, did they give you any details about the drone? Like, did it make noise? Did it,
See, that's I didn't ask them, and I didn't ask them if there were lights, and this has happened since publishing. This has happened in the past few days. We think we've tracked them down through this weird series of coincidences. We think we know who these kids are. So I think I will be able to ask them these questions finally.
Because that like what it was that made them think it was a drone is what I'm interested in.
Yeah. I really want to know if there were lights involved too, because and I've talked about it in the book. I talked about it on Where Did the Road Go on Strange Familiars. We've seen weird light back there. So I want to know if there were lights involved.
So let's get into the lights a little bit. I'm trying to look at a list here of what I wanted to talk about. But yeah, let's talk about those lights a little bit, because you've gone back and forth on what you think they are. I know initially you were told they were eye shine, and then you kind of leaned away from that, but it sounds like you're leaning back toward that a little bit.
Yeah, now I'm wavering again. Please, and I say this to the world, allow me to be inconsistent and indecisive when it comes to this stuff, because it's really weird.
You need to be.
It's really.
You need to be. You need to be able to adjust as you get different information.
Yeah, I think so. So the one fellow who was up there, a friend of mine, Jeff, he kept insisting I'm seeing eye shine, and I'm like, well, why are you saying it's eye shine? He's like, well, they're walking around. I'm like, all right. And I'm kind of like not believing him. So we go up there and finally saw them in last February. And they were moving and they were changing colors, but they looked like LED lights. These did not look like any kind of natural light you would imagine, reflecting off an animal's eyes. I've seen that before. I've seen eye shine. In fact, our most recent video, our most recent trip there, the podcast we got some crazy eye shine that was pretty intense. That was definitely eye shine. It was not eye glow.
Okay, like from natural animals?
I can only say it was high up, and they were forward-facing eyes, and they were very big. So, the John, who's my resident skeptic, along with Allison, insists that it had to have been an owl, just a big barred owl that we saw. He absolutely insists that, and I don't know. I can only say they were forward-facing, and they were close, and whatever it was turned and then turned back. So it was really, really creepy. So I hit it with the flashlight. It was dead looking at us. It turned away, and then you could tell it turned slightly back and looked at us, and then it was gone for good. And then we had enough. We were out of there.
So the flashlight didn't illuminate enough of it?
Not at all. No, it just was eye shine. It was back far enough in the woods that it was just catching the reflection of the flashlight.
Now, is this the one you talk about in the book?
Yeah, I talked about that in our last visit. So I go up to our most recent visit. And
that's where you heard the growling beforehand.
Yeah, we walked to the edge of the clearing, and I haven't been able to find this. I had tape running. I can't imagine that's not on the tape, but I can't find it. I know the section because I can hear us say, whoa, and we back up. But it was audible. It was loud enough. It was like a groan, very deep, and it sounded very close. It backed both James and I up to the middle of the there's a little parking area there. It backed us up to the middle of it. It was intense, and I cannot find it on the tape. I don't know if it's so low where it's not low in tone, not low in volume, low in tone where it's just hard to pick out of the other noise on the tape or what. But I'll happily send it to you if you can take a listen. Maybe you can pick it out.
Okay.
So I've had zero luck at getting it, but it should be on the tape. But yeah, it was enough to back us both up quite a bit. And then I immediately turned on the light. We don't tend to turn the lights on because it ruins your night vision, but we were kind of done for the night anyway. And we said, well, the next weird sound we hear, we'll flip the flashlight on, we'll look around, and then we'll go for the evening. And that was definitely a weird sound. So I flipped on the light, and I mean the trees were so thick right there I couldn't see even a foot into the woods. And I panned the flashlight around, and that's where we got the eye shine in a different location from where we heard that sort of groan.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, could have been an owl. Absolutely could have been an owl. I can't argue that, but it just it was interesting that it happened at that time right after the groan. And
yeah. So why did you go back thinking it was eye shine? Because it still seems to me like you're saying you can shine a laser beam at it.
So these are the weird lights are different than the eye shine. I call them eye glow, just to differentiate them, because I don't believe they're reflecting anything. Whatever these lights are, if they're eyes, they're glowing eyes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They look like LED lights in the woods, and we hit them with a laser. They were changing colors, not like Christmas lights, kind of very slowly and gradually. They went from a white to kind of a blue, and they go to green, and then maybe to an orange, and then slowly back to white. But they look totally man-made. These did not look like anything natural. So the fellow that was with me, JR, I said he had a laser. I said, hit that with the laser, see what happens. He'd hit them with the laser. They'd turn red and kind of aperture out every single time. And we did it, 20 times or more that night, where he'd hit them and they'd turn red every single time. And that's the point where I went, well, I don't know any man-made lights that do that. Like, up until this point, I thought there must be game cams out there. There's something out there. There's something out there man-made. And then once they started doing that, I was like, well, I don't think any man-made lights do that. So that's when I became convinced that, okay, these are something weird here. I still didn't think they were eye glow at that point. I thought this is just weird lights. There's some kind of weird lights out there. And that's where I was going to stay until I heard an episode of Sasquatch Chronicles where a guy from Texas described the exact same lights. But he saw them, I believe he saw them in the silhouette of a creature. So he was describing the exact same thing. He didn't shine a laser at them, but everything else, the changing of the colors, the multiple colors. And I remember him saying something like, you're not going to believe this, to Wes, the host of Sasquatch Chronicles. He said, you're not going to believe this, but they were changing colors. And that's when my ears kind of perked up. It's like, all right, now maybe they're eye glow. Maybe that's really what they are. Maybe Jeff, my friend's been right all along. And I kind of went with that theory for a while, but then just the more I think about it, I don't know. There's some kind of weird light. I just can't imagine their eyes. If they are, I mean, what has eye glow and for what purpose?
Right, but not only that, but what kind of eyes close down to an aperture like that? Because I'm assuming when you're saying like an aperture, it's like circular, right?
Yeah.
And that, to me, that sounds technological.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, not that I can describe what those are, but that does not come across as a natural sounding thing.
No,
to
and
me.
in no way do these look natural. They don't look like anything natural at all. They look like LED lights. That's what they look like. And, we went out there. I had estimated them originally much further away than I thought. We went out there and we saw that they were on the side of a hill, so we weren't looking through a hill. They had to be on the side of the hill, and this hill was much closer than I thought. So these were, about half the distance I originally guessed. So we were talking like 75 yards versus, 100, 150 or something, I think was my first guess. They were much closer, which is uncomfortable. And because they would, as the night went on, they seemed like they came closer, than where they were initially. So, if they're creatures, were they creeping closer? If they're not creatures for whatever reason, were they approaching us? It's very, very odd, and they don't move super fast. But, the other thing Jeff pointed out, like, he's like, see, that's the way it's moving. That's when a creature's standing up. And they do. That's about the speed these things move at. Like, where it's like, okay, I can, that's about the rate and about the distance, they're moving sometimes. Now, sometimes they'll blink out and you won't see them, and they'll reappear like much further away to one side or the other. It's just very, very strange. But, today, if you ask me, today I feel like they're not creatures. I think at the time I wrote the book, I was more like, I think maybe they're creatures. I vacillate, and I'll probably go back and forth on that 10 more times.
And that's fine. I mean, because until you know exactly what it is, you can't say.
Yeah, and I think it's probably best to just stand on weird lights until proven otherwise. I think because most of the time we're not seeing two lights together. Most of the time we're seeing a single light. Now, I found it very difficult to focus on them through binoculars, but I believe JR said he was able to see two lights together, like through binoculars. So as he was looking at them through binoculars, he could kind of see that it was two lights that looked like one light when he was not looking through binoculars. But I've never, I think once I've seen, two lights together that looked like they could be eyes. Otherwise, they've just been single lights. So, what's that? Yeah.
Right. The one of the things you say is that a lot of times you'll just sit there and wait for things to happen rather than traipsing through the woods or anything like that. And I've found that's often the case with me. Like, a lot of times a lot of times we're not waiting for something to happen when things happen, but we're usually just sitting around out in the woods. Yeah. And then things happen. The graveyard that I've gone to and have seen many, many lights in is one of those things where you basically just have to sit and wait, and after a while you'll start seeing the lights. Not consistently, but it's rare that they just pop up. Like, it's usually after you've been there for a while and just kind of sitting around, maybe quietly talking or whatever,
right,
that you start seeing lights.
Yeah, I think that's been the case with us. We go there, we're quiet, we're not, but we do talk, and we just kind of sit around and hang out, and then things will happen or they won't. I always tell people, like, what you hear when we do the Site 7 shows on the podcast, that's cherry picked, usually over multiple visits. So, we're not guaranteed something's going to happen every time we go out there. That said, we've had some neat stuff happen on a fairly regular basis. And Jeff claims those lights are there every time he's been there. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get there from the time we saw him in February. I didn't get there again until I think April or May, and then again in August. And there were just too many trees out to really see them at that point. So I did think I'm pretty sure I caught a glimpse of them through the foliage, but you can't get a bead on them because I don't know whether they're moving or the leaves are moving or what. You just really can't keep them in view in any way. Is there a
particular reason you named it Site 7?
Who asked me this recently? Someone asked me. Oh, Allison asked me this on a Patreon episode of Strange Familiars recently. There is, but I can't even tell you why. There aren't sites 1 through 6. I can tell you that. We don't have 6 other locations. There's a reason why we gave it that code name, but there are not sites 1 through 6. I think people think like, oh, they must have all these areas. No, we have a few areas we go to, but there are not 6 others. There's not sites 1 through 6.
So talk a little bit about the strange music that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things, and I've heard a few people mention it in Bigfoot reports in passing as one of the rarest sounds associated with Bigfoot. Well, it's not just associated with Bigfoot; it's associated with as most of these things are with paranormal phenomenon. But of course, Bigfoot people will say, "Oh, it's associated with Bigfoot," and UFO people will say, "Oh, it's associated with UFOs." Ghost people will say it's with ghosts, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But after my first book, a good friend of mine, I guess he's actually, occasional band member of mine, a really good friend, was sitting around in my kitchen talking with me, and he starts talking about being down in Hex Hollow, this other area in York County here. He's with his friend. And he said they saw these orbs behind the car, and they're watching these orbs kind of move around. And then he said, "So I know this sounds crazy, but I started hearing this like angelic singing." This is really like kind of beautiful, almost like kind of angelic vocal kind of music. And he said it was really freaky. He said it was very trance-like. For whatever reason, they just, without speaking, he said they ended up driving away. But I was like, why didn't you not? I was writing about this. Why didn't you tell me about this before? But he's just, he's one of these guys where it's not on his radar. He just happened to think about it at that time. But Christine told me about it as well, and that was one of the last things she told me. She's I think people reserve it because it sounds so out there. She's like, I've heard this and I don't know if she specifically said angelic, but the way she described it, I could tell was the same kind of thing. She said, I've heard this really kind of pretty, almost angelic music. This kind of singing, and I've heard it come from the direction of Toad Road. She said, and I said, well, I said it's not the first time I've heard that. It's not common, but I've heard it, and like I said, I've heard it in other places, even in York County. So that's one I'd love to hear. I'd really love to check that off my list. I've never heard anything like that. I'd really love to get a recording of it.
Yeah, good luck with that. There was one experience I had that involved music like that. I mean, every once in a while, it sounds like there's stuff playing in my house when there's not. But usually it sounds like a TV being on, not so much music.
Right. Yeah.
To the point sometimes where I can hear the differentiating commercials, and then I walk into the room and everything's quiet. Because I'll be like, nah, it's probably just the quiet playing, messing with my ears, and then I'll hear it stop and a different commercial start, and I'll be like, okay, something's on, and I'll get up and walk into the other room and there'll be nothing.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I don't know what that is. But there was one night where I was sitting up the same place that we had the invisible thing shaking the tree, and I was humming the end of this Fates Warning song, which has this big melodic riff to it, and the wind started blowing, and I swear I could hear it on the wind.
Wow.
And I'm going, all right, that's a little freaky. I'm sure that's probably in my head, but it really sounds like it's blowing it on the wind.
Wow.
And it's just that it was in a spot where a lot of other weird stuff happened. And I've always just kind of dismissed it as, that was probably my mind playing tricks on me. But it was kind of neat at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tricks or not.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
You also okay. So we mentioned earlier Fishman and stuff. You have a whole chapter on strange cryptids in here, and talk a little bit about some of the evolution of that, because initially you weren't really that interested in these, were you?
No, because like I said, I think I wanted it to be. I was very into the idea that the flesh and blood Bigfoot thing. I think was the first book. So some of this other stuff, these suggestions of Dogman and stuff, which, maybe Bigfoot could be a flesh and blood creature because there's things like it that have existed before in the form of different hominids and primates and so forth. Even though there's nothing in the fossil record to match it, maybe there are upright things like that exist. But Dogman is like, nah, nope. There's nothing in the fossil record like that. Never has been. If you think of canines, like they're a pretty efficient creature as it is, like evolutionarily speaking. It's hard to imagine them evolving hands and upright, especially upright with, they talk about hocked legs, and that makes no sense. You know what I mean? Like the hocked dog legs and an upright thing with hand, like what purposes would cause something to evolve like that? So when we're talking about these creatures, in no way do I think Dogman is a natural creature. No way, no chance at all. It just can't be. So it's something else, like something paranormal, something supernatural. I don't know. Something created in a lab. I don't know. We've had them in folklore for far longer than a lot of people will say. Oh, the government's making these things. Well, things like this have been in folklore for as long as we've been writing this stuff down. So, right. I tend to think more along those lines. But I got this report of a hyena type Dogman, which again, hyenas aren't even dogs. They're a separate, completely separate animal. They look like dogs. They look like wild dogs, but they're not. So you get these. Now we have, a creature that doesn't even, at least wolves in the terms of dogmen or coyotes or whatever these dogmen things are supposedly evolving from. At least they're in North America. Hyenas absolutely aren't. So, what could this thing be? But the witness was very definite. It was a large, upright hyena. This report came from Stan Gordon, super reputable source. He forwarded it to Lon Strickler, who forwarded it to me because Lon knows it's the area I kind of specialize in there. So that was like, okay, that's really weird. And that came, the date of that happened to be within a few months, I think, of that weird picture I took, which is, I talked about before, that blurry thing, which people have said looks dog-like. Several people have just said, oh, I think you took a picture of a dog, man. That's the only reason I connected those two. I'm not saying that's what it was. I'm just saying, like, okay, that's a weird thing. Then I got a report of a Mothman creature, or a winged humanoid. The witness described it as their Mothman sighting. That's why I also use Mothman. That was closer to the furnace, the Cador's furnace, which is the hyena was also. These are all these encounters of these cryptids seem to be on the north side, where most people, if they go legend seeking or whatever, they go to the south side of the road where there's a gate. This is on the north side where there's an old iron furnace called Cador's Furnace. It's been there since Revolutionary War time. So there's a Mothman sighting, like I said, just a mother and a daughter. They had heard weird screams in the woods previous to this, and they were driving home one night, and they stopped to look for deer in the field, and behind their car, they noticed something, moving around. They looked out the back window, and they saw this like 10-foot tall thing stand up and with like wing-like appendages, is the way they described it. And they drove away. They didn't see it fly off or anything else. They kind of rapidly sped from the scene. So there's that, and there was this Toadman as well that I mentioned. That someone called me, and they said, I have stories for Toad Road. I know you collect them. And this was an elderly woman. I said, okay, I'm all ears. And she said, she's told me some mundane stuff about how, it would seem kind of mundane, about how they would get chased by a guy in a Cadillac, in a black Cadillac. And I thought initially she was talking about, so the legend of poor Dr. Belknap is that he was, this mad doctor that chased people around and so forth. So I thought she was kind of maybe trying to suggest that. So I kind of brushed over that a little bit until she started talking about the Toadman. She said, you have to worry about the Toadman. Another of these crazy local legends, they said Dr. Belknap collected toads and toad statuary and was very interested in toads, and he had toads all around his house. I found pictures of his house, by the way. There's no toad statuary around his house, it's another thing, I think, to try to make the toad legend stick, and it's just not true. But I thought she was calling him the Toadman. I thought she was saying, like, he was the Toadman in the car chasing them down the road or something like that. But there was something about the way she said it which made me, like, before we were done talking, I said, what toad man? Like, what do you mean by that? And she said, it's what it sounds like. She's like, it's something that looks like a toad, but it stands upright like a man. She's like, it lives in the Cadorus Creek down in that darkest part where it gets real spooky down there. And she's like, you never heard that? And I was like, I've never heard that, like not once. She's like, yeah, that was the worry. She said that was, I think she said they had a flat tire down there one night and they were terrified because it was getting dark. And they said, she did not confirm whether she saw it or not. She says, I'm not going to tell you I saw it. I'm not going to tell you I didn't see it. But, she was very convinced that this creature was down there and that it was a worry. And that made me, of course, it made me think of the Loveland Frogmen, which, of course, in Ohio, they're not here. But I was, I dug around and I found this old newspaper article, Fish Walks Like a Man. Now, this is from 8 miles, this would be 8 miles north of where Cadorus Creek empties into the Susquehanna River. So it's not far away, really. This is from 1905 in the Wilkes-Barre Record. Fish walks like a man. Strange animal alarms residents along the Susquehanna. York City, October 22nd. People residing along the river midway between Clyde and Goldsboro are mystified and some alarmed over the sight of a strange creature that has its abode in the Susquehanna. Thus far, but 2 men and their wives have seen the thing. It was seen in broad daylight. More credence is given to the story than would be if it had been seen at night, when people are more prone to see things. The strange creature, whether fish or animal, is described as being as large as a man. When seen, it came up out of the water, erect like a man, and is described as looking like a man without arms. Those persons who have seen it declare that they are not the victims of an optical illusion. So it's just a short article, but it's just this weird, presumably amphibious thing that people see walking from the water in the same area. So that kind of lent more weight to the story to me.
Yeah, that's weird because that's not saying that's going to really exist.
Right. And again, that's, I can't believe there's a natural creature that evolved like that. We must be talking about something supernatural. And there are these folkloric creatures, these sort of frogmen, and some of them oddly have, they mention that they have like fish and frog features. They're like frogmen with fish tails or gills or so forth. So they have these sort of elements of fish as well. And they're also covered with green hair, which is the Michael story. Again, this makes me go back and say, like, are we talking about Bigfoot? Because the initial story in the paper said he ran into a green-haired monster. And these frog things are supposed to be covered in green hair in folklore. So now it makes me like go back again and go like, okay, maybe I did lead him when I said it wasn't a Bigfoot. Maybe it was something else and even weirder,
What I wonder is why certain areas would be prone to a particular supernatural entity. Like why would this area create a frogman?
Right.
Or a fish man.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when, I'd have to dig more to see if there's something in German folklore. So most of our residents are from, are German immigrants around here. I found it in Slavic folklore for sure. I don't know if there is a Germanic equivalent of this, but, often people bring their folklore with them, from the old world. So you get, Tommy knockers, for instance, with Welsh miners and stuff, even though they say they brought them with them in a sense. The Albatwitch creature that I talk about sometimes. There's a Pennsylvania Dutch legend that says they brought it with them from Germany so they wouldn't be lonely for the old world. So whatever it was, they brought this thing, which is, I think, a nice way of saying, people bring their folklore with them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting too. Is it an interpretation on something they're seeing?
Yeah, I don't know. And there's reports of these old world things. So they would drown people. They were responsible for drowning people. And there's some neat stories that I have in the first book, which, obviously I can't attribute it to this creature, but, they found people wrapped in chains under the water there and so forth that makes me think, obviously it's probably like a murder or something, but it adds a certain layer of like, whoa, like these things are responsible for drownings. They're supposed to lure people into the water. And they would keep human souls as slaves, some of them.
And I wonder if it's genetic, like if something keeps in our DNA, if it's not just the stories being told, but the interpretation of reality that is somehow passed on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it almost comes down to the point where folklore is an expression of the other. I'm at this point where these stories of these folkloric creatures, Josh with the fairies, me with the old, wild man reports in the newspapers and so forth. There's so much like what people are reporting today that I think there's something to it. I don't think they're just fairy tales. I think, like I say in the book, I think instead we got to think of them as tales of the fairies. These were sort of the equivalent of, paranormal witness reports of the day. And of course, they've been changed over time, and culture affects them as well. But, and we've talked about this on Where Did the Road Go before. Like, you half wonder if the thing that manifests as a frogman for one person maybe manifests as a weird light in the woods for another, and a Bigfoot for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of a wandering bit of energy or a wandering bit of consciousness that it doesn't have a set form.
Right. And it could be a number of factors from genetics to a sort of maybe there's a sort of a folkloric memory that's imprinted in us in some way.
And there could be plenty of people who pass right by it and never see anything.
Oh, I absolutely believe that. I mean, I've experienced that. Twice in my life I've experienced that. Once with my brother and a mountain lion, and once with a fellow I was doing drywall work with in a field that was completely lit up. I mean, it was lit up like a football stadium, this farm field, at about 4 a.m. or something, 3 or 4 a.m. And he couldn't see it. Like, it didn't matter to him. It was amazing. I'm freaking out. I'm like, look at that. And it was like, no. And he was like, oh yeah, and just kind of kept driving. And like, that's not an oh yeah moment. That's a stop and look moment.
We have time maybe for one more of these, and then maybe we'll continue the other ones on a Patreon segment, because there's a few other things I want to throw at you. But one of the other ones that has always interested me is the things under the ground type of stuff. Anytime I would read, I think Keel initially would talk about, the sound of motors running under the ground when there was nothing there. There were big engines, and then it happened at Skinwalker Ranch as well. And you have some stories from your area where it sounds like things are running underground, or there's some connection to the underground.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It started coming up in research I was doing in Delta, which I read about in Wood Knocks Volume 3, that series that David Weatherly puts out. And there was this weird story about people who had channeled a spirit in the 1920s, and they told him there was this pirate gold that was buried in the area. But it's right in the middle of all this whole area of like ghosts and Bigfoot and UFO sightings. It's a very concentrated area. It's like 8 square miles in southern York County of just incredibly concentrated sightings of all kinds of weird stuff. And that kind of alerted me to this buried treasure idea. I said, well, that's interesting. I'm going to start asking people when I go do investigations and so forth. And darn if I didn't find, like, again and again, I'm not going to say 100%, but so often when you ask somebody if I do mostly Bigfoot, so I can only talk about Bigfoot. So I go out on these Bigfoot investigations and say, is there something buried in the ground? And it doesn't have to be a treasure chest necessarily, but just something of value. And you'd be surprised how often people say, oh yeah, there's a story of a lost mine, or there's a story of, there's gold in the ground here, that, there's a legend of it, or there's, sometimes it is an actual treasure chest. There's a chest of buried coins or something like this, that, this legend. So it's come up so frequently where I think I don't know if it's a code for like these things coming from the ground, but there's just this idea of something of value being in the earth itself that seems to kind of come with these legends. And with Toad Road, I found an article that was a literal buried box of, I forget, it was some sort of money or valuables. I don't know if it was gold or what. That was, people were trying to dig out of the ground, but no one could ever get to it because the so-called spooks, according to the paper, would always scare people away. They could never break the seal on the box. And that was in Pleasureville, which is a few miles from Toad Road, but it would have been on the road at the time. This is in the 1800s. The main road out of York towards the area would have gone right through Pleasureville and then right on up to Toad Road. So it was essentially on, what at the time would have been Toad Road. They would have made no real difference between where it started and where it ended. It was just the road from York at the time. So that was interesting to me. And then I asked Christine, the woman who saw the lights and so forth in the area, I said, or no, she brought it up out of nowhere. She brought it up to me. She said, there's a legend of a silver mine around here in Toad Road. I'm like, what? I'd never heard that before. And she said, yeah. And she was going to ask her parents to get more information. She asked them, and she said that's basically all they knew, that there was just a legend of a lost silver mine. So I don't know if geologically silver can exist in that region, in the Helm region of county. But as I say in the book, just because it's not there doesn't mean someone didn't dig and look for it.
And I don't know what to make of the machinery sounds.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that always kind of freaked me out. Like why would you get machinery sounds under the ground when there's nothing there?
Yeah, and I found a very interesting Bigfoot book from 1976 that has not been reprinted that talks about machinery sounds in the ground associated with Bigfoot sightings. So it's
Yeah, there's definitely a connection. With all this different stuff for whatever reason.
Yeah, there seems to be this idea that there's something to do with the ground. And, like you said with Skinwalker, they were told like right away, don't dig. whatever you do, don't dig here. And they were hearing sounds. And I think when what NIDS took it over, they specifically chose to dig there to see if they could stir something up.
Yeah. I would.
Yeah, I know you would.
Let's see. We're just about out of time, but there was something else I wanted to bring up about this. Huh. Well, where can people get the book?
It is on Amazon. You should be able to order it into any bookstore as well. I don't know what their policies are for carrying it outright, but I think you can order it to most independent bookstores or chains like Barnes and Nobles and so forth. Just don't look behind you. You can look it up by the title, or you can look it up by my name, Timothy Renner, and it should come up on Amazon. You can, if you want a signed copy, you can get it directly from me. And I don't have any on hand right now, but I should have them within a week. So all my contact information is at strangefamiliars.com. It's the podcast website, but all that contact stuff goes right to me.
Okay. All right. And the next book is going to be the one with Josh.
Josh and I are working on a book. I don't know if that's going to be. I mean, that's the one I'm working on right now. If Josh hears this and he thinks I'm not working on it, he'll his head will explode. Depending on how long it takes us to write that, I might get another collection of old newspaper article Bigfoot reports out before that. I'm not sure, because that's not a lot of writing on my part. That's more just reprinting articles and so forth. So I think the next book will be the one with Josh, but if not, it'll be, I might get one of those Wild Man books out in the interim. But Josh, I'm working on our book, I promise. That's what I'm working on.
All right, Tim. We'll continue with a few other things on a Patreon only segment, but I thank you for coming on and talking about anytime. This. Where Did the Road Go would not be what it is without help from our Patreons. And a special shout out to those pledging $10 or more: Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Andy McNamara, Charles Beauregard, Craig Cicernos, Jose A., Scott Morris Everett, Robert Groom, Roland Belstead, Savannah Barlow, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Eric Citron, Russell Wilcoxon, Sasha Lord, Christopher Vaughn, Ben Crow, Carla Mahoney, John Eddy, Chris, Jack Bishop, Mark Brady, William Lovelace, Patricia Giaquinta, Kevin Schreck, Alex Bowes, and Alfred Tuttle. Thank you all so much. All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. As we said there at the end, there is a Patreon-only segment. It's about 45 minutes long. Here's something I want to start doing. I want to do more listener stories, and I haven't done them in a while. Things got very overwhelming, as many of you know. So I have I have listener stories going back a couple of years that I haven't done anything with yet. I'm going to try and get to those. Hopefully get the person who sent them to me, or the people who sent them to me, on the air to talk about them, or maybe we'll just read them. But here's specifically what I'm looking for right now. If you've had any weird experiences in the woods, whether, I don't care what it is, if you've been in the woods or a wooded area and had a weird experience, contact us. I want to hear about that. Maybe we'll do a show on it. Maybe I'll just collect a bunch of listener stories about it, because, strange things happen in the woods. And I know I've had my share of weird experiences in the woods. We were talking about a bunch of them here with Tim. So if you've had a weird experience in the woods, email stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com, or just go to wheredidtheroadgo.com, and on the contact tab, you can find the email address. Send it to the stories one, so it's all in one place. And hopefully we'll collect enough to do a decent length show, or a couple of shows even, on people's weird encounters in the woods. See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.